In this clip, we will cover fire calls. A fire call is a call by an HQ unit to one or more fire support assets to participate in a strike or a fire combat. Fire support assets include three types of units: artillery units, attack helicopter units, and air units. The fire call mechanics regulate how and when a fire support asset can participate in a combat action. There are 4 points during play when an HQ can make a fire call. Let's use the activation cycle for the 39th Guards Motor Rifle Division to provide some examples. During the strike segment of each friendly activation cycle, one active headquarters can make one fire call for each hex a player wishes to strike. This fire call then enables the assets called to execute that strike. So, for instance, during the reconnaissance segment of the activation cycle for the 39th Guards Motor Rifle Division, the Warsaw Pact player might acquire this M1 unit here. During the ensuing strike segment, the active headquarters here might make a fire call for a Soviet air unit to come in and execute a fire strike on that M1 unit. It is also quite possible that right after that strike, he would make a fire call to an off-map attack helicopter unit to make a fire strike against this Bradley unit, which is adjacent to friendly units and therefore observed. So that would be 2 fire calls for 2 fire strikes. Let's move forward to the operations segment of the 39th Guards activation cycle, and let's presume for the sake of argument that the Warsaw Pact player has designated a hasty attack operation for the 172nd Guards Motor Rifle Regiment, and that this Bradley unit here is the objective hex. During the defensive fire call step of any enemy operation, any one friendly headquarters can make one fire call, provided that it is superior to and within the command range of at least one friendly unit that is adjacent to the enemy units participating in that operation. This enables the assets called to participate in one or more defensive fire combats. So, for instance, during the defensive fire call step of this hasty attack operation here, the NATO player could use either of these 2 headquarters, both of which are in command range of this Bradley unit, and both of which are in its chain of command, to make a fire call, but he can only pick one. So he could make one fire call, and in this instance he might make a fire call to this artillery unit here, which would then participate in the defensive fire combat or combats against these attacking units. During the offensive fire call of any friendly operation, one of the active headquarters that is within command range of any unit that is participating in that operation that is itself adjacent to the objective hex can make a fire call to support that fire combat. The assets called can then participate in that offensive fire combat. So, for instance, in this example, during the offensive fire call step for the operation, the hasty attack operation of the 172nd Guards Motor Rifle Regiment, this forward headquarters could make a fire call to this DAG here to participate in that offensive fire against the Bradley unit. Finally, during each friendly round of a counter-battery fire cycle, any one friendly headquarters can make one fire call to one friendly artillery unit to execute a counter-battery fire strike. So, let's just say that right after the DAG has supported the offensive fire combat for this hasty attack operation, the NATO player could have either one of these headquarters make a fire call to this MLRS unit here, and that MLRS unit could then execute a counter-battery fire strike against the DAG that just fired, and it might be that the Warsaw Pact player would respond during his round of that counter-battery fire strike cycle by having his forward headquarters here make a fire call to this BM-27 Uragan to itself make a counter-battery fire strike against the MLRS unit, against the MLRS unit that just fired here. Generally, to make a fire call, the target hex must be observed, meaning that there is an adjacent friendly unit in the same chain of command as the calling headquarters and within its command range. So, for instance, in order for this forward headquarters to make a fire call to support the hasty attack against this Bradley unit, it must be in the same chain of command as these two adjacent Soviet units, which are then eligible to observe for that fire call. That would also be true when the Warsaw Pact player made a decision to strike this unit. Except for defensive fire, these observing units must be activating in the current activation cycle. So, in the case of defensive fire here, the Warsaw Pact player is the active player, and this unit can act as an observer for either of these two headquarters for a defensive fire call when it is not currently active. Also, during the strike segment, headquarters can make a fire call to strike a target hex that is not adjacent to a friendly active unit if that target hex has been acquired by a friendly reconnaissance attempt in the same activation cycle. Finally, during a counter-battery fire cycle, acquiring the target hex is actually part of the counter-battery strike procedure itself. So when this MLRS unit fired, during the counter-battery fire strike procedure, in which this BM-21 unit up here makes its counter-battery fire against that MLRS unit, the issue of whether that target hex has been acquired or not is part of the counter-battery fire strike process. Next, let's outline the conditions under which a headquarters can make a fire call to each of the three types of fire support assets, namely artillery units, attack helicopter units, and air units. An HQ can make two types of fire calls, Army calls and air calls. An Army call is a call to an artillery unit or an attack helicopter unit and can sometimes combine both types of units in the same call. An air call is a call for one air unit and can only be made during the strike segment of a friendly activation cycle. A player can never make both an Army call and an air call for the same strike. Each strike must be made with one or the other. Let's look at the details on each type of fire support asset. Headquarters can make an Army call to an artillery unit only if the artillery unit is in its chain of command and within its command range. Depending on the type of fire being executed and when it is being executed, headquarters can make a fire call to up to 2 artillery units, never more. So, for example, this forward headquarters here could make a fire call to both the DAG here and also to the BM-27 rocket artillery unit here, because both of them are in its chain of command. This belongs to the same division, and this belongs to its superior Army base. Let's look at attack helicopter units. Headquarters can make an Army call to an attack helicopter unit if that unit occupies the ready box on the friendly helicopter track, and the attack helicopter unit is both within its chain of command and for NATO of the same nationality. The Warsaw Pact can ignore nationality when making a call for an attack helicopter unit, but a West German headquarters could only ever make a fire call to a West German attack helicopter unit. A player can never make a fire call to more than one attack helicopter unit in the same action. However, a headquarters can call an attack helicopter unit without regard to the headquarters command range. More details are provided in the attack helicopter operations clip. Finally, let's look at air units. A headquarters can make an air call for an air unit only during a friendly strike segment. Moreover, it can only make a fire call for an air unit if air points of the same nationality are available on the friendly player's combat support points tracks. And again, nationality is a problem for the NATO player, but not for the Soviet player. So here, the Warsaw Pact player has 6 air points. So any Warsaw Pact headquarters could make an air call and could expend up to 3 air points for that air call. These details are covered in the air operations clip. However, the NATO player could only make an air call if the NATO player had air points of the same nationality as the calling headquarters on his combat support points tracks. A headquarters can always make an air call without regard to its command range. Which fire support assets can be called at which point during play is regulated by each player's fire support chart. A player determines the section of the chart that applies to the current point of play, and he also determines whether he wants to make an army call or an air call. He then locates the row for the type of strike or operation underway, and the column for the type of call he wishes to make, army or air, and finds at the intersection which types of fire support assets he can call and how many units of each type can actually participate. So, for example, if the Warsaw Pact player wished to make a fire strike during the friendly strike segment of a Warsaw Pact activation cycle, then he would see that he could use as a calling headquarters any headquarters in the active formation, that the strike would only be possible if there was an observing unit that was also activating in the current activation cycle and within the chain of command of the calling headquarters, that if he made an army call, he could call in 2 artillery units and 1 regiment of attack helicopters. Or he could make an air call and he could expend between 1 and 3 air points to form the unit that responds. Correspondingly, if the Warsaw Pact player was conducting a friendly assault operation, he would see that he could make a fire call from any headquarters unit in the currently active division, that the observing unit that was adjacent to the objective hex would have to be participating in that Warsaw Pact assault operation, and that the only thing he could do would be to make an army call. No air call is allowed, but that army call would enable him to call 2 non-rocket artillery units and 1 regiment of attack helicopters. Finally, if the NATO player was executing a hasty attack operation, the Warsaw Pact player would see that he could make a defensive fire call from any one headquarters on the map that was within command range of an observing adjacent unit, meaning that the unit is adjacent to any of the NATO attacking units, and that observing unit must be in the chain of command of that calling headquarters unit, and he could only make an army call to a friendly divisional artillery group. 1 DAG unit could participate. And that's how the Warsaw Pact fire support chart regulates participation when a fire call is made. There are 2 factors which can override the limits specified on the friendly fire support chart. The first is that air and helicopter units can never be called during a fog turn. The second is that air and helicopter units can never be called during a night turn. There is one exception. The U.S. player is allowed to call an AH-64 attack helicopter unit during a night turn. However, he is still barred from calling an AH-64 during a fog turn. The NATO player is subject to one restriction around nationality that does not affect the Warsaw Pact. Normally, a headquarters can make a fire call to any artillery unit in a superior base formation. However, if that artillery unit belongs to a different nationality than the calling headquarters, then the HQ can make a fire call to that artillery unit only during a friendly strike or a friendly assault operation, and at no other times. So, for example, this West German HQ here can make a fire call to this U.S. unit from the 7th Corps base formation only during the strike segment of its activation cycle, or during the operation segment when friendly units are conducting an assault operation. These are the two actions where there is enough planning time for a fire call to cross national command boundaries. And this concludes our clip on fire calls.